Good afternoon and welcome to Valley News Now. I'm Adam Shalafu, and today I am joined by Eric Tars. Now, Eric, thank you so much for joining me on the program. Let's first get into a little bit about your position. 1 second, let me just pull up your video. Here we go. So, Eric, you are the Senior Policy Director at the National Homelessness Law Center. We have you here talking about a recent Supreme Court ruling and that was major implications for the national homeless population, Johnson v. Grant Pass. So just to start, if you don't mind telling us a little bit about that court case as well as your day-to-day as far as the work you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Last Friday, the court decided in a 6-3 decision, this case, Johnson versus Grants Pass, which comes from a small town in Oregon called Grants Pass, about 40,000 people, which, like many American cities, has seen an explosive population growth, about doubling in size over the past 20 years, and yet has not doubled its supply of affordable housing. And so is seeing more and more of its residents being stretched to the point that they can't afford housing anymore. In Grants Pass, again, as in so many places across the country, you would need to work more than 2 full-time minimum wage jobs just to be able to afford the rent. And if you lose your housing, many landlords there's a less than 1% vacancy rate. So you would need to show 3 times your monthly income more than the rent in order to be even eligible to rent a place. And for many people, that's just not possible. So in Grants Pass, the city saw a growing problem of homelessness, but rather than responding to their neighbors who were losing housing with compassion, they decided to take a different approach, an approach which ticketed and fined and arrested people experiencing homelessness, even though they had no other place to go, simply for sleeping or putting a blanket over themselves. And last week, the Supreme Court, in the 6-3 ruling, approved of that practice. They said that it is not cruel and unusual under the 8th Amendment of our Constitution to punish people for undertaking those basic life-sustaining activities that you and I do every day. We all sleep, we all shelter ourselves from the elements. But if you do those activities outside in a public space and you're homeless, you can't do them. The law in Grants Pass actually said that it only applies to people who are doing that to make a temporary habitation. So if you have a full-time house, you can go out in the park, lay down a picnic blanket, take a nap, stargaze. But if you don't have a home and you need to do that to survive, then that can be deemed a crime. And so despite a widespread, take it for given that everybody needs a safe place to sleep, the Supreme Court, in this shameful yet ultimately unsurprising ruling, said that homeless people aren't included in those constitutional protections against cruel and unusual punishment. And this sets a really dangerous precedent for the 250,000 people who sleep outside each night in America, and for the millions of families who, as I said, are just one paycheck away from homelessness. And sadly, this ruling is going to make it easier to ticket and jail homeless people for sleeping outside, which is only going to make homelessness worse, putting fines and fees in the way of people saving up for getting out of homelessness, arrest records that are going to make it harder for them to get or maintain employment. Those things actually prolong homelessness, make it take longer for people to get off the streets. And so we're really concerned that this is going to set America down a bad path.
And so just to clarify, based on what you're saying and some of the things I've read on the website as well, that you do consider this to be cruel and unusual punishment for that population.
Can you say that again? Sorry.
I just want to clarify, so your position on this is you do feel it is cruel and unusual punishment towards that population?
Yes, that this is based on a long line of precedent dating back centuries in some ways, but at least back 60 years to a case called Robinson versus California, which says that it's cruel and unusual to punish people for something they can't control for their status. You can punish conduct, if somebody's doing something bad, but you can't punish them for just something that they are. And in this case, it's clear that you cannot separate the status of being homeless from the need to sleep and shelter yourself in public spaces when there are no places alternatively available to you. The town of Grants Pass has no emergency shelter in it where people can go. And so it's not saying that anybody can sleep anywhere they want, anytime they want. That was never the decision, just that you can't punish people when there is no actual alternative place where they can be. That is cruel and unusual. And to me, that it's very clear that's cruel and unusual. At the international level, we've also seen that international human rights monitors have deemed this as cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, sort of the international equivalent of cruel and unusual punishment. So, yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that it is cruel and unusual, that it is a violation of the Eighth Amendment. But last Friday, the Supreme Court disagreed.
And I'd just like to ask you to elaborate a little bit about that violation of the Eighth Amendment as well.
About the tie to the Eighth Amendment, sorry.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So the case that this is really kind of built out of is a case called Robinson versus California, where the courts back in the 1960s found that a person who was convicted of being addicted to drugs, they were not high when they were arrested, they were not in possession of drugs, they simply had scar marks on their arm indicating that they used drugs. And they were arrested, they were convicted under a California law that said it's illegal to be addicted to drugs. And the court in that case said, the Supreme Court reversed the lower courts in that case and said that it's cruel and unusual punishment to punish somebody just for being addicted to drugs. This is a medical condition, and it's not right to punish somebody for that. And so in the same way, we see it as people who are unhoused have to sleep. It's part of who we are as human beings. Sleep deprivation is a form of torture recognized at the international level, as is exposure to the elements, to cold or heat. And so to punish somebody for having to take those life-sustaining actions in a public space in the absence of any private space is a violation of the Eighth Amendment.
And, obviously we're here in Fargo, but this is something in every state. These situations are having an impact, and there's a lot of national trends that, are directing this or hitting this directly, as well as just kind of things that are indirectly affecting the situation. What do you think some of these important trends are that are affecting cases like this and the homeless population in general as it continues to grow?
So the biggest concern that we see is the growth of homelessness, and in particular unsheltered homelessness. Our country used to provide enough affordable housing so that everybody could meet their needs. And so even if you were working at a job and not making enough money to afford the market rent, if you're elderly and on a fixed income or disabled, you could find housing that was affordable to you and get subsidized housing if you needed it. That commitment to one another that we had held since basically the Great Depression was broken in the 1980s through the Reagan Revolution, cut HUD's budget for affordable housing in half. And every year since then, we have been losing hundreds of thousands of units of affordable housing to the point now where we are millions of units short of the affordable housing that we need. And I'm sure your viewers and listeners are seeing this all the time. The rents are going through the roof. People's incomes are not keeping pace. And so everybody's being stretched further and further. And that's why we need to reinvest in affordable housing in this country. We're proposing a $356 billion down payment package that could actually start to reverse some of these harms that we're seeing. And we know that this will work. We know that during the pandemic, when we did have some really big investments at the scale we needed into housing, into eviction protection, into non-congregate shelter for people experiencing homelessness, homelessness actually went down during the pandemic. And the child tax credit that put dollars back into people's pockets to help them pay for rent and other necessities, those programs lifted more than a quarter of the people living in poverty out of from below the poverty line. So we know these programs work. We know that they keep people in housing. And when you have people in housing, you don't need anti-camping laws or anti-sleeping laws because people aren't camping or sleeping on the streets in the first place. And that's the outcome that we want to get to.
Now, obviously, this is a huge hindrance to someone in that population's road to financial recovery, lifestyle recovery, being able to, really just get their feet back under them. Do you know anything about what that road even looks like now? Is people in that population are looking to get back into permanent housing and get their feet back under them?
Yeah, what we're really concerned about is another concerning trend across the country is unfortunately the growth of the criminalization of homelessness, of people getting tickets, fines, fees, communities, not just local communities, but even at the state level, passing camping bans and other forms of punishment that would actually put more barriers in the way of people getting out of homelessness. And so the best way to ensure that people can exit homelessness is not to put those barriers in place in the first place. It's to get them into a safe, stable place where they can rebuild their lives. And so an approach called Housing First, which gets people directly into a safe, stable housing environment, and then can, wean people off the subsidies as they are able to bring in more of their own income, has been proven 90 plus percent effectiveness rate in terms of getting people permanently off the streets. Nothing else even comes close. I've talked with some researchers who say, the only people who are trying to muddy any of the evidence around this are people with an agenda. The evidence is as clear as it is that tobacco smoking causes lung cancer. But there are people with political agendas who want to use the existence of homelessness in our communities to push for these to redirect public attention away from the root causes of homelessness and instead put funding, put resources into this police approach, which is politically expedient, but ultimately counterproductive to the end of ending homelessness. And so we're really concerned about a trend of state bills being promoted by the Cicero Institute. They've created this template legislation that would ban camping, force people into concentration camps, basically for not being able to afford rent, and take funding away from the proven solutions to homelessness, housing, and services, and put it into stopgap measures. And so we really don't want to see that happen. But this court case kind of paves the way for more states and more communities to go down that path. What we would much rather see instead is communities putting those housing and service resources in place, doing outreach to people on the streets to let them know what resources exist, and then getting people into housing and keep making sure they have the resources to keep themselves there.
What do you see as some of those roots to the situation you talk about? Uh, having those things that are affecting the situation at large, and just kind of taking this punishment approach rather than a restorative approach.
I'm sorry. I'm just having trouble hearing you. Can you say that again?
Sure. Uh, you touched on that there's some root causes that aren't being addressed, and instead there's, these fines, tickets, and legislation put into effect. What are those root causes that you're seeing?
Yeah. So the real root cause is the lack of affordable housing in our communities. As I said, rents are going up at a pace that far exceeds um, people's ability to pay them. The income that they're getting, either from their work or from pensions or Social Security. In most communities, the cost of renting even a studio apartment exceeds the entire monthly Social Security benefit. And that's why we see the fastest growing uh, uh, subpopulation of people experiencing homelessness are our seniors, our grandma and grandpa, and that's who's going to be hurt by these policies that are criminalizing homelessness. Somebody who has worked their entire life, is now old and potentially disabled, can't do that. They're relying on their single income, um, and they're going to end up losing their housing because their rent is raised, out on the streets, and being blamed for not being able to afford an apartment in a city that they had no control over. And so these policies are really misdirecting attention from that lack of affordable housing, which our elected officials are responsible for creating to make sure that everybody in the community has access to it. And so, whether that's through direct subsidies, whether it's through rezoning, um, whether it's through other development incentives that can help to make affordable housing created in the community, we need to be doing those things to solve the affordable housing crisis. There are other drivers of homelessness, but including mental health, addiction, those sorts of things that people want to talk about a lot. Um, but in other countries, and even in the US, back in the period from kind of the 1940s to the 1970s, we still had people who are addicted to drugs, but they weren't out on the streets because they were able to maintain affordable housing throughout their addiction. And so you didn't have those side consequences that you have from people who are living outside and doing drugs at the same time. And so if we can at least get people back into housing, then we're going to solve that problem. So the root cause, the lack of affordable housing, is the true root cause, but access to adequate health care, affordable health care. In some states, medical debt is the number one cause of homelessness. Um, and so we know that access to medical care is really important. That's again overlapping with the concerns with our senior population. These are the kinds of things that we need to be able to address. Those are what actually creates public health and public safety in our communities. And that's how we should be responding to homelessness, not with law enforcement that actually isn't making anybody healthier or safer.
Now, it sounds like you guys are doing a lot to help. What can just your everyday citizen do to try to help?
Um, Yeah, I think the most important thing is to speak out on these issues wherever and however you can. So when there's a conversation at the local level about homelessness and what the community's response should be, and that could be at a town hall meeting, that could even be on your local listserv, your neighborhood next door uh, email list. If somebody says, there's a homeless person camped out on the corner, we should do something about it. You should say, yes, I agree. But let's not go down this path of banning camping or trying to get that person arrested and pushed off without making sure they have a better place to go. Let's make sure that we're providing the housing, the services to actually bring that person back inside. That person is one of our neighbors, who we need to be concerned about, not pushing them out like they're some sort of other. And so whether that's, like I said, on your local listserv, at a town hall meeting, or with your congressional representatives, talking to them, because that's where the American homelessness crisis that we have right now really started, was from the loss of federal dollars to addressing this. We need to, one of the biggest problems is that when people see homelessness in their community, their first instinct is to go to their mayor, their city council, who can do some good things. They certainly shouldn't be doing bad things, but they don't have all the resources that they need. We really need a huge reinvestment of federal dollars into affordable housing, universal rental assistance, supportive and emergency services, to make sure that everybody who needs housing can actually get it. Right now, we're only providing subsidies to 1 out of every 4 people who's income eligible for it. And that means 3 out of 4 people who need those subsidies aren't getting them. And that's what's leading to homelessness on our streets.
Well, thank you so much for all the information and the work you're doing as well. Eric, is there anything else you would like to add before we let you go?
The last point I guess I would make, particularly for your listeners, is that all of these policies around affordable housing and around criminalization hurt everyone, but they also hurt some communities more than others. And so Native American populations are one of the most overrepresented in the homeless population, Black and other people of color also. And so if you care about those communities, if you care about making sure that we're reducing the gaps in access to housing and wealth for those communities, then it's really important that we not make things worse, because those communities are also disparately targeted by law enforcement already. If you make just existing in public space, living your life in public, a crime, we know those are the communities that are going to hurt most and hardest. But it's about everyone. Everybody benefits when we all have access to housing. And so, yeah, that's the takeaway, I think.
Excellent, Eric. Thank you so much for providing some great information, some very helpful information on this topic. And thank you all for listening or watching, however you're consuming this interview back at home on your mobile device or however. That's all for now on Valley News Now.